How to Survive Until You're Published, Season 1, Episode 10, Villains, How They Shape Your Novel.
Okay, we are so excited to have Amey Zeigler on again. This time we're talking about villains with her. She is amazing and always has some really good stuff for us. So I'm going to introduce her. Amey Zeigler is an award-winning author of romantic comedies and mysteries. Her mainstream romance, The Casserole Dish, won the runner-up in the Roan for Sweet Contemporary Romance. Her 10 years of theater training in college and high school inspired her to narrate her own books. She spins stories with humor, charm, and heart, often with a dash of action and adventure. When she's not writing, she's teasing her 3 kids, globetrotting with her husband for book research, of course, or trying new things. You can find her at ameyzeigler.com or on Twitter or Instagram. So we're excited to have you on again, Amey.
Oh, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you having me again. That's great. Thank you.
So we're talking about characters for the next 2 weeks, but we wanted to zero in on villains with you. So, which is so fun.
Villains are so fun. Like, they are so fun to write. I think they might be my favorite thing about writing is writing villains. I love them.
Yeah, they are so fun. So why do you love writing villains? What pulls you into that so much?
Well, I think you can do a lot of things with villains. They have some deep wounds that motivate them and inspire them to act. And what I love about villains is they are proactive. Like, they're usually out to get something, and they can sometimes cause your protagonist to also be into action. So they're just a lot of fun to write. You can make them larger than life. You can make them really villainous, and all of those things. So yeah.
I love it.
That's great. So in your opinion, what makes a compelling villain?
Oh, that's a great question again. I think the best thing about villains is that they have to have a deep wound. And then the second thing is their motivations have to be really strong and compelling. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'll tell you what I mean. So in Lisa Cron's Story Genius, which you guys have, if you have not got these books yet, listeners,
need to get them.
These are the Bibles for these. This is what helped me. I felt like I was a writer before, and I wrote like a couple of books before I stumbled into these books. And my books were good. Like, they were very good, but it took me a long time because I was figuring out all this stuff. And Lisa Cron and Jessica Brody's book on Save the Cat Writes a Novel are 2 of the books that I sit with by my bed while I'm incubating. I write notes, I take things, I have sticky notes in them. They're all marked up. And what I love about Lisa Cron's Story Genius is she talks about something that other people call a shard of glass, but Lisa Cron calls it the wound. Okay. And I think this is where you start with a good villain. Like, some people love to make pointy teeth villain, or, capes and all those things. Yeah, you can start with a beautiful character drawing, but I love to start with a motivation. What wounded your character so much that they have now told themselves this big, beautiful lie? And here's the crazy thing about villains and protagonists is that they're actually the two sides of the same coin. Because as we write our protagonists, the good guys, they usually have a shard of glass or a wound of their own, right? Like, that's kind of the basic of every character. At least that's the basic foundation for Lisa Cron's Story Genius, is that everybody has a wound. It's usually happened in their childhood. And the protagonist and the villain both tell themselves a lie to protect themselves from this wound, okay? But here's where the difference between the hero and the villain come in, is that while the hero has a desire to sacrifice, they have honorable desires, right? Unless you're making an anti-hero, which is a totally different conversation. And, if you're doing that, awesome. I'm not very good at that. I'm just going to strict with hero bad, hero good, villain bad, right? Like, okay, we're just gonna go with that, or mostly bad and mostly good, right? Okay, we're just gonna go with that. But these the difference between the hero and the villain is that what you do with that shard of glass, right? Usually the friends around the protagonist will help remove that shard of glass. And the difference between the villain is that they have alienated all of their friends, and there is no one to help them eliminate that shard of glass with that wound, or to help them heal that wound. And that is the biggest difference. The friends that the villain has are usually minions and lackeys and, people that are subject to the villain instead of true friends. So that's kind of where I start. Is I say, all right, what wounded my hero, or what wounded my villain? And so I have a couple of examples of some really good villains from all sorts of genres that I kind of wanted to talk about, as well as some things that you need in order to create a good villain. And I have some websites that you can check out, and we're going to talk about a couple of motivations that you can use for your villain. So the first thing that a villain needs is a motivation that makes sense. Because what I hate doing is I hate watching a movie and I go, why? Why did he do that? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, right? And that's one of the reasons why they always do the monologue, where the villain, they even make a joke about it, right?
Yeah.
Where they're like, got me monologuing, right? That's wonderful. But we have to understand why somebody is doing something, or else we don't buy that somebody would just be that evil just because of evil. Now, there are certain genres like horror, the monster or whatever is just going to be evil. You don't have to have a backstory for the monster. The monster is born of evil. It's only does evil. It only understands evil. That's a totally different genre. I don't really consider those like villains. I consider those monsters, and that's a totally different class. But we're talking about people or things, who, because it can also be like a vampire. It can be like a witch. It could be a warlock. It could be, different types of beings. But it has to be what they are doing and why they are doing it must make sense. Okay. So like with Harry Potter and Voldemort, he had a reason, right? Harry was the boy of the prophecy. Harry's the one, because of the spell of his mother, he was, banished or whatever, whatever. So he has a reason he wants to come back. He wants to come back and claim his power. And so he's after Harry Potter because he's the boy who could, destroy him or whatever. So he has to destroy Harry Potter. The second thing you must have for the motivation is it must be compelling. And one of the examples, this is from dabblewriter.com. And if you want, I can give you these links so that your readers can go to your page and they can follow these links.
Great.
I really felt like this was really good information. The writers there at dabblewriter.com talked about Eric Killmonger from Wakanda and how his motivation was super compelling.
He's a good villain.
Isn't he? Oh my gosh, he is great. Like, you almost want to side with him. Like, at one point I was like, yeah, I almost agree with what he's saying. And that's terrifying, right? Like, he saw all this, just growing up in a rough neighborhood and all this stuff. And he decides that, using violence is the way to solve problems. But that's the lie, right? Because the wound, a protagonist could have grown up in that same neighborhood and have decided something different, right? But he decided that how to solve the world's problems was through more violence, right? Which is what you don't agree with. The third point is it must be connected to a value system. And I think this is the most intriguing. And I think this is where, like, people who like these gray, these morally gray villains or whatever, you have to believe that what that villain believes in is right for them. Right? Which is a little terrifying. I don't know if you guys have ever read, one of my favorite books is Devil Wears Prada. Have you at least watched the movie? Like,
yes, the movie. I haven't read the book. I should read the book.
The book is good too. I have it all marked up because that was one of the books that I first started reading when I was like, all right, I want to study my genre. And I started reading Devil Wears Prada, Shopaholic, because this was kind of like before rom-coms were a thing. It was kind of chick lit. Yeah. And so I kind of read that.
Yeah.
And in contemporary romance, you don't have villains that are like, dressed in swirly capes and they don't have magical powers. But I love Miranda Priestley because she's super scary, right? She is. And Meryl Streep does a great job portraying her. And you can almost understand why she's doing what she's doing. Like, she is a jerk. Like, okay, so for those out there who haven't watched this, Miranda Priestley is the head of, golly, what's the name of the magazine? Do you guys remember?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, I don't remember.
Oh, I can't off the
It's-
top of my head. Let me see
Something-
if I can find it.
It's not Vogue. It's the not Vogue
No.
book. It's like Look magazine or something like that. It's, I don't know, some
Oh,
off-brand.
Runway magazine.
Runway magazine. Thank you for looking that up. And so she is in charge of this super high fashion magazine that comes out, I imagine, every month, maybe quarterly. And she is so on top of things. She just, with one look, she can tell you that your outfit is, just terrifying. And she has this, what she has done is, and she even said to Andy, like, you and I are the same. And Andy has to make a decision at the end. Like, she doesn't want to be Miranda Priestley because Miranda gives everything up for her passion, right? She gives everything up to the god of fashion. And Andy wants to have relationships, right? She wants to have a life outside of work. And so she's willing to sacrifice that for what she loves, right? And that's the difference. Like, I love that scene at the end. She's like, you and I are like, Andy. And that was kind of the aha moment for Andy. And she's like, no, we're not. I value things outside of fashion. And she walks away, right? So I love that because you understand her motivations. Like, wanting to do good at work is not a bad thing, right? Like, she is successful. She's wildly successful, but it came at a cost. She had twins, she had a failing marriage, she had all these things that were failing in her life. And because she gave herself up for this passion for fashion, which in the end won't, give anything back. So that's kind of the lesson there that they learn. Villains' motivations must be rooted in humanity. So they must feel feelings like fear, jealousy, betrayal. And those feelings are feelings that we have actually felt before too, right? We've been afraid. And some of these things could be like fear of social pressure or fear of societal, fear from social pressure. So like societal pressure, fear that I won't fit in, jealousy, betrayal, like all of these things, you have to have a villain that's realistic and human, right? So I like using fear a lot because I feel like fear is kind of the opposite of action. Fear is the opposite of bravery. Yeah. So, okay. And the last one is actually on theme. And it has to, the villain must portray and prove the theme, right? You must see the villain as the theme in action, right? In opposition to and in contrast to the protagonist who is trying to make the world a better place. The villain usually is trying to not make the world a better place. In the theme in The Lord of the Rings, one of them, there's lots, is that we all have darkness within us if we feed that part of us, right? Because you see Gollum, who is I would say he's not the main villain because that's like what Sauron or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
But he's the most human one. That's the one that Frodo like grapples with physically, right? In the movie and in the book. But I think that's so interesting that that all of us have darkness within us, and we show that as Frodo starts to decline, right? You see him start out
Kind of
as
slipping towards that.
Yeah, slipping. And then at the very end, right? What makes it so heartbreaking is he's standing on the edge of Mordor, holding the ring, and he can't do it, right? Because you see him slipping. And so you see him becoming like Gollum. And that's terrifying, especially if you're becoming the villain. So that's kind of scary. And then, of course, Umbridge, like, she is like the worst villain ever because she feeds on fear. Like, she purposely makes all these crazy rules to like control and create fear in these things. So I love that those things work really well for villains. Hopefully you learned something there. And then I have a couple of motivations that I was going to read, and then you guys can ask some questions and I can talk more about
Sounds good.
something. So So here's 39 villain motivations. So one of them is romance, revenge, distinguish oneself, to fit in or gain acceptance, justice, greed, fear, desperation, social cohesion. Like, especially in post-apocalyptic stuff, they want, people to be a certain way. And so you have to fight against the system, which can be a villain, right? Like usually you have one person who, kind of embodies the system.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite types. I'm a sucker for dystopia system villains.
Yeah. Yeah, because you want to fight against the system. And I think that is so effective. So desire to better oneself, like I was born a peasant, but I will die a king, right? Like to ambition, power to achieve a goal, escape destiny. I will this is from Darcy Pattison, and I will put this link in there too. I found this super helpful. I really loved reading through this list because that helped me, because I'm always like, all right, it's my villain. This is super fun. I want to make sure he's a good one. And so, or she, you can have a good girl villain and villainess. And so that's just fun. Okay. So questions, like what else can sorry.
Yes. Oh no, you're great. Honestly, it's great. The more you talk, the better. So I kind of wanted to go back to a little bit about what you were saying about them proving the theme. Because you touched on this a little bit too in your theme episode about making the villain almost a foil of your protagonist, because it's just them approaching almost the same motivation from different angles.
Right.
So maybe if you could just elaborate on that and how you've used foils in your writing for your villains.
Absolutely. So I like to look at other people's works and how they do this really well. I think Voldemort and Harry Potter work really well. Just because there's a lot of things going on in that 7 or 8, depending on if you watch the movies or read the books, in that series. So you can have your protagonist and your antagonist actually start at the same place and have them even have similar things happen to them, but have them both wind up in 2 different places. And that's because of the choices that they're making. So I like to have as much contrast in my characters as possible. So one of the reasons why I love Malfoy as one of the villains that Harry Potter has to kind of work with is because he embodies everything that Harry is not. He is witch-born, he comes from a long witching family. He knows the system. He's, Hogwarts he feels right at home in Hogwarts. He has immediate friends. He already has his little passel of friends around him.
He's rich. He has money.
He's rich. Harry is poor and an orphan and lives underneath, the stairs. Like he is everything Harry is not. And the crazy thing is that Harry became a better person despite his circumstances, whereas kind of Malfoy is given everything and he still chooses evil. And so I love those contrasts. I think Sherlock Holmes, Moriarty, right? You have to have these villains that are smarter, better, and can outdo your protagonist. He must, in the end, they always win the day. At least they should. In my book, I like happily ever afters. I don't write horror. But in the end, you have Moriarty, and he's constantly testing and proving the hero, right? Which is Sherlock. And Sherlock constantly has to put his brains to test. Like he is constantly tested. And they don't have so much of the themes in Sherlock. They probably do. I'm probably just too dunce to realize that. But in the Harry Potter, going back to Harry Potter, the theme, I would guess, that comes out of watching Harry and Malfoy kind of interact is that you can be given everything and still end up a jerk, right? And you can start out with nothing and still become a great person, right? That could be a possible theme. I don't know if Joanne decided that when she started out, but I think that's one theme. Another theme is you don't have to start with magic in order to be a great wizard, right? You don't have to be wildly talented or whatever. or come from, or have a lot of support, or have family, or have money, you can earn those kinds of things. That's a very proactive theme, right? You can learn to do this is very inspiring. It's motivational and empowering to me, right? Like, I love those kinds of themes. So hopefully that answered your question. I kind of rambled there.
No, yeah, it totally did. I think that was great.
That's great. Yeah. I had one other question. What do you see done wrong with villains? Like, what is some mistakes you've seen?
Oh my gosh. I hate to call out certain companies, so I will remain them nameless, but I've been watching a couple of cartoons that I am just done watching their brand of cartoons anymore, because their villains are so, like, you get to the end and you're like, oh, the villain wasn't really villainous. They were just misunderstood. And I'm like, what? That's stupid. I think that violates a lot of the rules that we're talking about here. The reason why people are villainous is because of the choices that they're making, right? And if you go back and say, oh, well, like, it's like going back to the Harry Potter, right? Harry started way lower, but his trajectory on wizardry and all of these things, he just really took off, right? Whereas Malfoy was given everything and he just didn't do anything with the gifts that he was given. And so when you have these villains who like have these tragic backstories, I'm like, guess what? Your hero should have a tragic backstory too. But what makes your hero so great is overcoming the odds that are stacked against them, overcoming that wound. And so when you have the villain be the one that's like, oh, I'm just misunderstood, then it really takes the wind out of your story. It does not prove your theme at all. It just says, oh, just kidding. He's really the hero and he's just been crapped on his whole life. That's the problem. It's society's fault that he's this way. It doesn't ring true to me. I think it does not give a very satisfying story. I don't think it is memorable. And I think it just kind of falls flat. The other mistake I think people make, and this is something my daughter tells me all the time, she's like, uh-oh, they shouldn't have made him hot. Because then he's redeemable, because everyone's oh, hot villains.
That's such a good point.
It is really hard to recover because another thing I learned in my communication classes is that we judge on heuristics. In other words, we judge, like if somebody is beautiful, we naturally equate that with good. It doesn't matter how villainous he is. And I think why that is so harmful, as much as I enjoy a dark prince and, you know, hotness and all that kind of stuff, it's harmful, I think, for people, you know, my daughter is old enough now, but when you're younger and you're Twitter-pated and all these ideas, you're like, oh, you know, he's hot, therefore he's redeemable. I think it kind of sends the wrong message to impressionable kids who aren't really thinking about it. Like, as storytellers, you and I and our audience, we're thinking about these things. We're trying to understand story mechanics and how this works and all these things. But these young kids are just like, dude, he's hot. I would totally, you know, love it if he was crushing on me. And you're like, what? Why?
He's the bad guy. Yeah.
Bad guy, right? It's just teaching the wrong morals.
Yeah, I think there's like a time and a place for it, right? But you have to be really careful about how you go about it and when it's done.
Yeah, I think you have to be really judicious. I mean, I am trying to transition into YA fantasy, and I actually want to have the redeemable villain, the hot assassin is what I call him, because he has a name. His name is Ash, but I'm just like, oh boy, I want to make him bad, but not so bad that he can't be redeemable because he is hot. Because my daughter's like, you made him hot, you have to make him redeemable. It's like, dang it.
Yeah. But I think like that actually brings up a good point, right? Like, you can't make him bad enough that he's not redeemable. So I guess I could lead into one more question, right?
Absolutely.
So when you're writing a redeemable villain, and I know this is a whole nother topic that we could go on for a while. What is that line, and how do you make sure you don't cross it if you're trying to make your character redeemable?
That is really great. I think you have to make them likable in some way. So you don't have to make them like likable, but you have to admire them in some way. So for example, some redeemable villains, I'm trying to think. I honestly think like Scarlett O'Hara is kind of the villain of her own story. But I like her because she's ambitious and she works hard. Yes, she steps on a lot of people, you know, on her way to save Tara, and I understand her motivations. But I I think she could be redeemed, and she was redeemed. Somebody wrote some fan fiction. They called it Scarlet, I think, and it was a second book to the. It was like not written by Margaret Mitchell at all. It was written by somebody else. That's why I call it fan fiction, because I'm like, I don't know if it's sanctioned by the Mitchell estate or whatever. But
Gotcha.
the only way I could read that is because I actually thought that Scarlet could be redeemed because she had good qualities in there somewhere. So like, if you're talking about somebody like, what's that from The Godfather? Michael Carlone or whatever his name is.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to redeem him, then you have one tiny save the cat moment, right? And you go, he's not all bad. He is not all bad. There is some good in him, right? And you see that in even Darth Vader when he saves Luke. It comes really late, but he saves Luke, right? And you're like, oh, he's not 100% bad. He is redeemable. And his redemption comes really late in that arc. I didn't particularly love the prequels where he was a whiny brat, because I was like, oh man, you just totally destroyed Darth Vader. But that's a whole nother topic. But I could bash on those all day. The 7, 8, or let's see, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 7, 8, and 9 were even worse. So we won't even go there in terms of storytelling. But yeah, you do. Okay, so you also hint at it. Like Luke goes, I see some good in you. I sense some good in you, right? Even though he's doing these bad things, somebody believes in them. And they have this whole thing called like the touchstone character, who is like the one who is the good and pure. And if they say that the villain is good and pure, then you know at some point they're going to be redeemable. So Princess Leia is a touchstone character. Luke was in this particular instance because he was telling the audience, there is some good in you. I sense it. Right. And so we believe Luke, we trust Luke. And so we know that this is going to happen.
That makes sense. Yeah, I like that. Because, yeah, like you said, it's a whole nother topic if you really get into it. But I think that's like some really good starting points. So I think we've covered a lot. Do you have anything else you want to add on villains really quick?
No, just enjoy writing villains. I do have a challenge for you, though, because I want to challenge you guys. I want you to look at your villains, and I want you to ask those questions, like these questions right here. Do my villains' motivations make sense? Is their motivation compelling? Is it connected to a value system, even if that value system is skewed, like in our opinion? Is it rooted in humanity? And is that motivation on the theme? Is that something that is going to resonate with the whole story? Is it something that I can repeat over and over again to have that resonant ending on theme? So that is my challenge. And then my next challenge is that. So look at your work in progress and look at that. And the next one is start with your villain on your next work in progress, your next story, and start with that and say, okay, this is my motivation for my villain. This is what I'm going to do. And then see if you can come up with characters that contrast that, or show the opposite values to show the contrast and the foiling, and make interesting characters that go along with your villain.
I love it.
Awesome.
That's awesome. That is so
and then let me
awesome.
know how it goes. Like, seriously, reach out to me, send me a Instagram message or whatever, and let me know if this was useful, because I love hearing from people and writers, and I love helping other writers too. So reach out anytime.
Love it. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for being on. This has been a treat. We love everything you've said. So we really
you guys
appreciate it. Thank you.
You guys are fantastic. Thank you so much for letting me just talk. It's more like a lecture than a podcast.
Anytime, honestly.
I love it. I love it.
And I'll send you those links over to you guys too. So
perfect.
Sure.
That'd be great.
Yeah. I think part of the reason why we love to bring people on is because, I mean, we've got some pretty good experience, but it's always good to hear from somebody else. So we appreciate you talking instead of us, because we're not as,
we all learn from each other. We all steal from each other, and we all learn from each other.
Yep.
I steal from other people all the time.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Have a good one.
Because if you're drowning in words, so are we, and you might as well not do it alone.